Nelson Mandela, The Journey That Changed History. Part 1. The Making of a Revolutionary, 1918 to 1943. On July 18, 1918, in the small village of Mvizo, South Africa, a child was born who would reshape the course of history. Named Relilila Mandela, he entered a world sharply divided by racial segregation and colonial rule. Born into the royal family of the Thembu people, young Mandela's early life was steeped in traditional African culture, values, and customs that would later influence his leadership style and philosophical outlook. The death of his father, Gadla Henry Mfakeni, when Mandela was only 9 years old, marked a crucial turning point in his life. This personal tragedy led to his adoption by Chief John Jintaba, the regent of the Thembu people, a development that would expose him to both traditional African leadership and Western education. At the Great Place Palace in Kekazwini, young Mandela observed the intricacies of African leadership as tribal elders and chiefs gathered to discuss matters of importance, learning valuable lessons about leadership, consensus building, and the importance of listening to all voices. His formal education began at a local Methodist school, where he was given the name Nelson by his teacher, following the colonial practice of assigning English names to African students. Despite this cultural imposition, Mandela excelled in his studies, showing early signs of the intellectual prowess that would later serve him well in his fight against apartheid. At Fort Hare University, one of the few institutions where Black Africans could pursue higher education, Mandela began to develop his political consciousness. The university years proved transformative. Here, he encountered other young African intellectuals who shared his growing concern about the racial inequality that permeated South African society. It was during this period that Mandela began to question the established order more deeply, influenced by discussions with fellow students about nationalism, freedom, and the right to self-determination. His involvement in student government provided his first taste of both leadership and resistance to authority, as he was temporarily expelled for participating in a student protest. After leaving Fort Hare, Mandela moved to Johannesburg, a city that would dramatically expand his political horizons. The contrast between his rural upbringing and the harsh realities of urban segregation shocked him deeply. Working as a law clerk while completing his studies, he witnessed firsthand the daily humiliations and injustices suffered by Black South Africans under the segregation system. The crowded townships, passed laws, and systematic discrimination he observed would fuel his growing political activism. During this period, Mandela formed crucial relationships that would influence his political development. He met Walter Sisulu, who would become his mentor and introduce him to the African National Congress, ANC. Through his law studies and early legal work, he also began to understand how the legal system could be both a tool of oppression and potentially a means of fighting for justice. His experiences during these formative years shaped his understanding of the complexity of South African society and the need for fundamental change. The early 1940s saw Mandela's transformation from a privileged young man focused on personal advancement to a committed activist for racial equality. He joined the ANC in 1944, helping to establish its youth league alongside Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu. Together, they brought new energy and radical ideas to the organization, advocating for more direct action against racial discrimination. This period marked the beginning of Mandela's lifelong commitment to the struggle for freedom and equality, setting him on a path that would eventually lead to both prison and the presidency. Part 2. The Rise of Resistance, 1944 to 1964. The period between 1944 and 1964 marked a dramatic evolution in both Mandela's personal ideology and his approach to fighting apartheid. As a young lawyer and activist, he initially embraced nonviolent resistance, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's successful campaign in India. However, the increasing brutality of the apartheid regime would force him to reconsider this stance and eventually lead him down a more militant path. The ANC Youth League, under Mandela's leadership, brought new vigor to the struggle against apartheid. They organized strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience campaigns that challenged the government's authority. The 1952 Defiance Campaign, which Mandela helped coordinate, marked the first large-scale multiracial resistance to apartheid. Thousands of people deliberately violated apartheid laws, filling prisons and drawing international attention to South Africa's racial policies. During this time, Mandela's personal life was marked by both triumph and tragedy. His first marriage to Evelyn Toko Mays crumbled under the pressure of his increasing political activism. His subsequent marriage to Nomzamo Winifred Winnie Madikizela in 1958 would become both a source of strength and controversy in the years to come. While managing his law practice with Oliver Tambo, the first black-owned law firm in South Africa, Mandela became increasingly involved in the opposition movement. The Sharpeville massacre of 1960 marked a turning point when police opened fire on peaceful protesters, killing 69 people, including women and children. It became clear that peaceful resistance alone would not be enough. The government banned the ANC, forcing it underground. After much soul-searching, Mandela helped establish Umkhonto we Sizwe MK, the armed wing of the ANC. This decision to embrace armed resistance, though limited to sabotage of government facilities while avoiding civilian casualties, would have profound consequences. The government's response was swift and severe. Mandela went underground, earning the nickname the Black Pimpernel, as he evaded capture for 17 months. During this period, he traveled across Africa, gathering support for the ANC and receiving military training. However, his luck ran out in 1962 when he was arrested and charged with leaving the country illegally and inciting workers to strike. The subsequent Rivonia trial would become one of the most significant political trials in history. Standing in the dock at the Rivonia trial, Mandela delivered his famous speech that would echo through history. "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." These words transformed him from a local revolutionary into an international symbol of resistance against oppression. The trial ended with a life sentence, and Mandela began his 27-year imprisonment on Robben Island. Part 3. The Prison Years, 1964 to 1990. The 27 years Mandela spent in prison transformed him from a revolutionary leader into a global symbol of resistance and wisdom. His incarceration on Robben Island began with harsh conditions designed to break both body and spirit. Confined to a tiny cell measuring just 8 feet by 7 feet, Mandela faced daily challenges that would have crushed lesser individuals. The routine was brutal. Waking before dawn, performing hard labor in the limestone quarry where the glaring sun reflecting off white stones damaged many prisoners' eyesight, enduring insufficient food, and facing constant psychological warfare from prison authorities. Despite these conditions, Mandela established what became known as Mandela University among the prisoners. In the quarry, between breaking rocks, prisoners would gather in small groups to share knowledge. Mandela taught history, political theory, and constitutional law, while others shared their expertise in different subjects. The prisoners would write their lessons in the limestone dust, quickly erasing them when guards approached. This informal education system helped maintain morale and intellectual engagement among the prisoners. The years in prison saw Mandela develop extraordinary self-discipline and emotional control. He maintained a strict daily routine, waking at 4:30 a.m. to exercise in his cell, studying via correspondence through the University of London, and meticulously documenting his experiences. He learned Afrikaans, the language of his oppressors, believing that understanding their culture and mindset was crucial to eventually achieving reconciliation. This period also saw him develop his skills as a mediator, often resolving conflicts between prisoners and occasionally even with guards. International pressure for Mandela's release grew steadily throughout the 1980s. The Free Nelson Mandela campaign became a global movement, with protests, concerts, and economic sanctions against the apartheid regime. Meanwhile, Mandela engaged in secret talks with the government, beginning in 1985. He refused multiple conditional offers of freedom, maintaining that he would not compromise his principles for personal liberty. His statement that only free men can negotiate, prisoners cannot enter into contracts, became a powerful rallying cry. The prison years also took a heavy personal toll. Mandela was permitted very few visitors, and his rare family visits were conducted through a glass partition. He was allowed one letter every 6 months, and these were heavily censored. He missed watching his children grow up, and his marriage to Winnie became strained under the pressure of separation and her own political persecution. Yet throughout this period, Mandela maintained his dignity and continued to command respect from both fellow prisoners and, increasingly, from his captors. By the late 1980s, the combination of international pressure, internal resistance, and economic sanctions began to force change in South Africa. Mandela was moved to more comfortable conditions at Victor Verster prison, where secret negotiations with the government intensified. These talks were delicate and dangerous, with Mandela walking a fine line between maintaining his principles and finding practical solutions for South Africa's future. His experiences in prison had taught him patience, strategic thinking, and the art of turning enemies into partners, skills that would prove crucial in the negotiations to end apartheid. Part 4. The Path to Freedom and Presidency, 1990 to 1994. The period between Mandela's release from prison on February 11, 1990, and his inauguration as South Africa's first democratically elected president in 1994 was one of the most critical and dangerous times in the country's history. The day of his release was watched by millions worldwide, as Mandela emerged from prison hand in hand with Winnie, showing no bitterness despite his 27-year incarceration. His first speech as a free man, delivered from the balcony of Cape Town City Hall, set the tone for the transition. Our march to freedom is irreversible. We must not allow fear to stand in our way. The negotiations that followed were incredibly complex and frequently threatened by violence. The country teetered on the brink of civil war, with clashes between ANC supporters and government-backed Inkatha Freedom Party members claiming thousands of lives. Right-wing white extremists threatened armed resistance, while some militant black groups demanded immediate and total transfer of power. Mandela had to navigate these competing interests while maintaining his vision of a peaceful transition to democracy. A critical moment came with the assassination of Chris Hani, a popular ANC leader, in 1993. The country seemed on the verge of explosion, but Mandela's television address to the nation helped prevent widespread violence. Instead of calling for revenge, he appealed for calm and unity, saying, "Now is the time for all South Africans to stand together against those who, from any quarter, wish to destroy what Chris Hani gave his life for the freedom of all of us." This moment demonstrated Mandela's extraordinary leadership ability and his commitment to peaceful transition despite provocations. The negotiations themselves were fraught with challenges. Mandela had to balance multiple competing interests, addressing the fears of the white minority while maintaining the support of the black majority, managing various political factions within the ANC, and keeping international supporters engaged while ensuring South African ownership of the process. He showed remarkable skill in knowing when to compromise and when to stand firm, always keeping the ultimate goal of a peaceful, democratic South Africa in sight. The agreement to hold South Africa's first democratic elections in 1994 was a triumph of negotiation and compromise. The campaign period was intense, with Mandela traveling throughout the country to rally support, while also reassuring worried white South Africans that they had a place in the new Rainbow Nation. The elections themselves were a logistical challenge of unprecedented scale, with millions of first-time voters participating in what became a celebration of democracy. The culmination of this period came with Mandela's inauguration as president on May 10, 1994. The ceremony was attended by world leaders and dignitaries, symbolizing South Africa's return to the international community. In his inaugural address, Mandela declared, "Never, never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another." The moment represented not just a personal triumph for Mandela, but the birth of a new nation built on the principles of democracy, reconciliation, and equal rights for all. Part 5. The Presidential Years, 1994 to 1999. Mandela's presidency faced monumental challenges that would have daunted even the most experienced political leader. He inherited a country deeply divided by centuries of racial segregation, with massive economic inequality, a volatile political situation, and high expectations from all sides. His approach to these challenges would define not just South Africa's future, but also set a model for transitional leadership worldwide. The immediate challenge was building a functional government of national unity. Mandela made the strategic decision to include his former opponents in his cabinet, appointing F.W. de Klerk as one of his deputy presidents and maintaining many experienced civil servants from the apartheid era. This decision, while criticized by some ANC hardliners, helped ensure stability and continuity in government operations. He also appointed members from various political parties to key positions, demonstrating his commitment to inclusive governance. Economic challenges were particularly daunting. The new government launched the Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, to address basic needs in housing, electricity, education, and healthcare. Under Mandela's leadership, the government built over 1 million new homes, connected millions of households to electricity and water, and established a comprehensive social welfare system. However, the challenge of addressing centuries of economic inequality proved more difficult than many had hoped, with unemployment and poverty remaining persistent problems. Perhaps Mandela's most remarkable achievement was his work on national reconciliation. He understood that healing the nation's psychological wounds was as important as addressing material needs. The establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, under Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a groundbreaking approach to dealing with past human rights violations. Rather than pursuing retributive justice, the TRC offered amnesty in exchange for full disclosure of apartheid-era crimes, creating a platform for both confession and forgiveness. Mandela's personal approach to reconciliation was equally significant. His decision to support the predominantly white Springbok rugby team during the 1995 Rugby World Cup became a powerful symbol of racial reconciliation. By wearing the Springbok jersey, long a symbol of white Afrikaner dominance, and presenting the World Cup trophy to Captain Francois Pienaar, Mandela transformed a potential flashpoint into a moment of national unity. This gesture, immortalized in the film Invictus, demonstrated his understanding that reconciliation required both symbolic and substantive actions. On the international front, Mandela transformed South Africa from a pariah state into a respected member of the global community. He played key roles in mediating conflicts across Africa, from Burundi to the Democratic Republic of Congo. His moral authority made South Africa an important voice in international affairs, and he used this influence to advocate for human rights, poverty alleviation, and conflict resolution worldwide. Under his presidency, South Africa also established new relationships with former enemies and strengthened ties with both Western and developing nations. Despite these achievements, Mandela's presidency also faced significant challenges and criticisms. The pace of economic transformation was slower than many had hoped, and the HIV/AIDS crisis, which would later become a major national emergency, was not adequately addressed during his term. Some critics argued that the emphasis on reconciliation came at the expense of more radical economic transformation that might have more quickly addressed Black poverty. Part 6. Legacy and Global Impact. Beyond 1999, Nelson Mandela's influence extends far beyond his presidency and continues to shape global discussions about leadership, justice, and reconciliation. His decision to serve only one term as president, stepping down in 1999 despite calls for him to continue, set an important precedent for democratic leadership in Africa and demonstrated his commitment to building institutions rather than personal power. After leaving office, Mandela remained active in various social causes, particularly the fight against HIV/AIDS, which had become a major crisis in South Africa. Following the death of his son from AIDS in 2005, he became increasingly vocal about the need to combat both the disease and its stigma. The Nelson Mandela Foundation, established after his retirement, became a platform for his continued work on social justice issues, including poverty alleviation, education, and conflict resolution. His influence on leadership theory and practice has been profound. The Mandela way of leadership, characterized by moral courage, strategic patience, and the ability to forgive enemies while maintaining principle, has become a model studied in business schools and political science programs worldwide. His approach to conflict resolution, emphasizing understanding opponents' perspectives and finding common ground, has influenced peace processes from Northern Ireland to Colombia. The concept of Ubuntu, the African philosophy that emphasizes our interconnectedness and mutual dependency, which Mandela often referenced, has gained global recognition as an alternative to individualistic approaches to leadership and social organization. His emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation rather than revenge provides crucial lessons for societies dealing with historical injustices and contemporary conflicts. Mandela's personal example continues to inspire new generations of activists and leaders. His famous prison number, 46664, became the name of a global campaign against HIV/AIDS. The United Nations declared his birthday, July 18th, as Nelson Mandela International Day, encouraging people worldwide to spend 67 minutes helping others, representing the 67 years he spent fighting for social justice. However, Mandela's legacy also faces challenges in contemporary South Africa and globally. Economic inequality in South Africa remains severe, and some argue that the compromises made during the transition from apartheid have prevented more fundamental economic transformation. The rise of populism and ethnic nationalism in many parts of the world seems to challenge Mandela's vision of inclusive, reconciliatory politics. Yet these challenges perhaps make Mandela's legacy more relevant than ever. His life demonstrates that seemingly insurmountable obstacles can be overcome through perseverance, strategic thinking, and moral clarity. His example shows that justice can be achieved without vengeance, that enemies can become partners, and that principled compromise can be a source of strength rather than weakness. As we face contemporary challenges of racial justice, economic inequality, and political polarization, Mandela's life offers both inspiration and practical lessons. His famous words, "It always seems impossible until it's done," continue to encourage those working for social change. His legacy reminds us that transformative change requires both unwavering commitment to principles and tactical flexibility in their pursuit. In the final analysis, perhaps Mandela's greatest achievement was showing that moral leadership can transform not just a nation but the world's understanding of what is possible. His journey from prisoner to president, from freedom fighter to peacemaker, remains a blueprint for those seeking to transform conflict into cooperation, hatred into understanding, and fear into hope. Part 7, a symbol of freedom, reconciliation, and human dignity. Nelson Mandela's transformation from a prisoner to a president, from a freedom fighter to a peacemaker, stands as one of humanity's most powerful stories of perseverance and moral courage. His 27-year imprisonment, rather than breaking his spirit, strengthened his resolve to create a democratic, non-racial South Africa. Mandela's greatest achievement was not just ending apartheid, but his extraordinary ability to foster reconciliation instead of revenge, showing the world that love can triumph over hate. His legacy continues to inspire people worldwide in their struggles for justice, equality, and human dignity. If you've been moved by Mandela's incredible journey and his message of peace and reconciliation, please support this channel by subscribing and giving this video a thumbs up. Share this video to spread Madiba's enduring message of hope and unity with others who might be inspired by his remarkable life story.